This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Boris Johnson tipped to become UK Prime Minister. What does this mean for Africa? Death toll from Monday's bomb blast in Mogadishu rises to 17. And probe launched after Libyan fighter jet lands on Tunisian soil. This is Africa Live. A warm welcome. I am Peninah Karibe. Let's have a look at the stories lined up this hour. The Kenyan shilling tumbles as finance minister is arraigned in court on corruption charges. And in sports, Zinedine Zidane claims Gareth Bale refused to come on as a substitute against Bayern Munich. We start in the UK, where Boris Johnson is expected to be announced the country's new Prime Minister. The latest poll of Tory party members, who are the only people allowed to vote, shows Johnson scoring a whopping 74%. Jeremy Hunt is polling at a mere 26%. That's a margin of 48%. Results should be announced within the hour. Meanwhile, Foreign Office Minister Alan Duncan resigned on Monday in protest against Johnson becoming the next Prime Minister, and other top officials are expected to follow suit. For more on this, we're joined by CGTN's Richard Bestick live in London. Richard, can you give us an update on the latest there?
Well, as you were saying there, Peninah, the minutes are ticking down. Within 3/4 of an hour, we expect Boris Johnson, the controversial former Foreign Secretary and former Mayor of London, to be declared the leader of Britain's ruling Conservatives and, by default, the Prime Minister designate, although he won't take up that position until tomorrow. Getting into the door of number 10 is quite possibly the easy bit for Boris Johnson. He is, you'll remember, Britain's Brexit cheerleader, Brexiteer-in-chief, and he is hard line on getting out of the European Union by October the 31st. Do or die. That means with a deal or without a deal. And it's caused shock and horror among senior members of his own party in Parliament. You were talking there about Alan Duncan, the Foreign Office Minister, resigning. Well, he'll be joined by others, including senior figures like Philip Hammond, the current Chancellor of the Exchequer, by the Justice Secretary, David Gauke, and by others who haven't actually declared their hand yet. All these people will be going to the backbenches in Parliament and plotting against a Johnson government. Now, is that something that Johnson can work with? Well, bear in mind that his parliamentary majority has just been reduced to 2 seats, and next week there's a by-election in which they are expected, the ruling Conservatives are expected to have lost another seat. So he'll have a majority of 1. That would be difficult to get anything through Parliament, basically, but to get something as controversial as Brexit through, very difficult. So maybe it is getting into number 10 will be the easy part for Boris Johnson. Staying there and getting his promises, his Brexit promises through, could be another matter entirely.
All right, Richard, thank you for that update. Richard Bestick live in London. And as Richard was talking about, there may be just 3 of many possible officials who may resign after Johnson's win. There is speculation that at least half a dozen lower-ranking ministers may also quit over the coming days. What's making them all jump ship? Let's have a closer look at the leading contenders' background.
Boris Johnson was educated at Oxford University, where he was a friend of former Prime Minister David Cameron. Johnson started his career as a journalist, but was fired from his first job at the Times newspaper for making up a quote. During his time at the Daily Telegraph as the Brussels correspondent, many believe his articles helped increase anti-EU sentiment in Britain. Johnson became a member of parliament in 2001 and won 2 terms as Linda's mayor from 2008 to 2016. During that time, he presided over the 2011 London riots and the 2012 Olympics. In 2016, he became one of the most recognizable faces of Brexit campaign, but he decided not to compete against Theresa May for the premiership when Cameron resigned after the UK voted to leave the European Union. May would appoint Johnson as her foreign secretary, but he resigned a couple of years later over her Brexit strategy. During his recent campaign for prime minister, he announced several policies, including 2 tax proposals. 1, to increase the income tax higher rate threshold, and 2, to reach the point at which people start paying national insurance contributions. But they really paled into insignificance against a topic which has consumed Britain for the past 3 years, Brexit. Johnson had pledged to take the country out of the EU by October 31st with or without a deal. That has upset pro-EU government ministers. Conservatives like Hammond have hinted they were prepared to bring down their own government rather than leave the EU without an agreement. Johnson would have just 3 months to follow through on his promise, and a move that experts say will damage economies on both sides of the channel and determine the fate of generations of Britons. But he says he is prepared to do whatever it takes to get it done. Yang Zhao, CGTN.
And for more on this, we're joined by Brooke Spector, an international relations expert and former U.S. diplomat and associate editor of the Daily Mavericks. Thank you very much for joining us. So Boris Johnson, a clear favorite to lead the Tory party. What does a Boris premiership mean for Africa?
Well, let's assume that Boris Johnson is the prime minister. We'll know in a couple of hours, obviously. The top 2 layers of his foreign policy issues right now, it's the immediate one of the cargo ships, the one stuck in Gibraltar under British control, and the one stuck in Bandar al-Abbas in Iranian control. That has to come to a resolution quicker than slower. But the second tier is going to have to be, even assuming the Brexit closure takes place on schedule as he's promised, it's going to be an immediate need to negotiate trade agreements with the EU, with the United States, and of course with a whole range of other countries, many of them in Africa, that the EU has trade agreements with. And so those will be in his inbox as he walks in the door. The trick will be figuring out how to order those, how to rank them in priority, and most importantly, of course, how to get them all done.
As a foreign minister, Boris demonstrated little will to positively engage with Africa. In fact, at some point, he used some derogatory terms to describe some African leaders. So should he become the prime minister, what should we expect from him?
Well, I mean, it's one of the things you begin to realize is that a person like Boris Johnson, or Donald Trump for that matter, they speak off the top of their mind almost regardless of the consequences on judgments like that, on the nature of a leader in another country or the nature of a relationship. But once you take the office, then you're constrained by the reality of the issues you have to deal with. I think you pragmatically and realistically, you should not expect a big push by Britain in new relationships, new issues, new efforts in Africa. But I think the institutional momentum will carry through on foreign assistance projects, trade promotion, which is a major feature in most British embassies in Africa, because Britain supplies a large number of goods and services to African countries. But you're also going to see the attention, as I said earlier, the attention is going to be pulled away to some degree to those large trade relationships and above all trade agreements. It's hard to negotiate a trade agreement with all 53 or 54 African states. That takes years to get it done. The EU and the African nations took a long time to get the various trade relationships worked out. But the Johnson administration, assuming he is in fact prime minister, will focus, I think, first of all, the United States and the EU to get their own trade arrangements, their own trade house in order. You'll see less focus on Africa simply because there's only a limited number of time in the day.
All right, Brooks Spector, thank you very much for those insights and thank you for joining us. In Abuja, at least one demonstrator was killed during clashes by Nigerian police and a group of Shiite Muslims. The Islamic Movement of Nigeria group have regularly taken to the streets in the last few years, calling for the release of their leader, Ibrahim Zakzaky. He has been in detention since 2015. Gunshots could be heard and at least 2 vehicles were set on fire. The clashes between police and Zakzaky's supporters have raised fears that Islamic Movement of Nigeria group may become radicalized, just as the Sunni Muslim militant group Boko Haram. Authorities in the country say they are taking adequate measures to keep the situation under control. Meanwhile, kidnapping of foreigners and high-profile Nigerians is common in the country. The incidents have, however, risen sharply this year. So far, 14 people have been kidnapped in less than a week in the country. Most of them are citizens from Turkey and some Chinese. 4 Turkish nationals were abducted by gunmen at a bar in Kwara State on Saturday night, while 2 Chinese workers were kidnapped earlier this month and 5 others were kidnapped in April. No group has said it carried out the abductions. To Somalia, where the death toll in Monday's blast has reached 17, according to medics in the capital, Mogadishu. CGTN's Abdulaziz Bello reports from Mogadishu on how the latest attack has affected the country's recent security progress.
Police in Mogadishu say a suicide car bomber tried to storm this security checkpoint before detonating an explosive-laden vehicle. The blast targeted government forces manning this checkpoint, leading to the country's international airport, a highly guarded area of the city that also hosts the United Nations and the African Union headquarters. Al-Shabaab has since taken credit for the blast, claiming to have targeted senior government officials. But police say that those killed include civilians and soldiers.
17 bodies were brought to us by emergency service operators from the scene of the blast. 28 people were brought for treatment, some seriously injured. Other victims were taken to different hospitals. This clearly shows the impact of Monday's blast.
Last week, security chiefs issued a major security alert restricting the parking of vehicles along the city's major roads. Monday's blast also caused extensive damage to nearby business centers and hotels. The latest attack comes 10 days after Al-Shabaab launched a brazen attack on a downtown restaurant in Kismayo, some 500 kilometers south of Mogadishu, killing 26 people. Among those killed include an aspiring candidate in the upcoming regional elections. Journalists and other foreign nationals were also killed after gunmen launched a deadly siege on the SSA hotel. The Somali president has now called for regional support in curbing the group's ever-increasing threats.
Terrorism is not only a Somali fight, it is a regional fight. Tackling terrorism, therefore, requires a regional response and regional approach to our collective security. Our strong will to tackle the security challenges facing Somalia and the region. Somalia is at the heart of response to these regional challenges. No country that tackles terrorism alone. I hope you will know now, consider Somalia as an active partner rather than a passive recipient of support.
Outside the capital, security forces have made progress in dislodging Al-Shabaab from some of its perceived strongholds, but this hasn't thwarted the group's ability to strike the capital. In recent weeks, authorities here in Mogadishu say that they have managed to nab a number of vehicles laden with explosives before reaching their intended target. This has been attributed towards a community policing program recently launched by the government. But the latest attack sheds more light on the increasing security challenges here in the capital, and security authorities will be called upon to explain just how the militant group was able to launch such a deadly attack in one of the heavily guarded zones in Mogadishu. Abdulaziz Bello, CGTN, Mogadishu, Somalia.
This is Africa Live. We're taking a short break. Coming up, unknown assailants attack yet another Ebola treatment center in the DRC. And EU countries agree to new migrant and refugee deal.
data out of the country. The country's foreign currency reserves.
With a dedicated and diverse team of anchors, CGTN now brings Africa to the palm of your hand.
I'm Peninah Karibe in the heart of Nairobi, which is bustling.
From everyday heroes to the continent's most powerful figures, we bring their voices to you.
We haven't changed. And this is something most of us are very excited about.
We bring you news that's changing perspectives.
From Nairobi's city center.
News that brings Africa to the world. CGTN. See the difference. Africa Live. Find your voice.
A Libyan fighter jet has made an emergency landing in southeast of Tunisia with its pilot aboard. The aircraft was later surrounded by Tunisian security and military engineering units. Regional authorities say the plane could have run out of fuel. However, preliminary investigations are being conducted in the district of the National Guard of Medellin. They will then be entrusted to the military judicial authorities given the military nature of the aircraft. CGTN's Adnel Shawashi has that update.
The National Defense Ministry in Tunisia said on Monday that it spotted a Libyan aircraft around 7:30 a.m. violating the Tunisian airspace in the Benir region south of Medellin and activated the operational preparedness system to intercept the aircraft, where its pilot was forced to land in the El Jurf Al Ahmar in Medellin.
I've held a meeting with the President, which focused on the security situation and the latest development on the land, maritime and aerial borders, and the ministry's strategy to react to any threat.
Authorities announced that a Tunisian military plane rushed to the scene and found that the Libyan aircraft was an L-39 military aircraft piloted by a colonel. The Libyan national was arrested by the army.
The National Army guarantees the safety and the territorial integrity of Tunisia. The situation is under control.
Experts in Libyan affairs assert that the security situation in Tunisia will remain fragile as long as Libya is ravaged by war and armed conflicts. Thousands of Libyan nationals who have fled the conflict are now living on the border regions.
There's no security in Libya. We fled to Tunisia and now we fear the unrest here as well. We hope to return home, but it's impossible because at the moment there's continuous fighting between militias.
In his first statement, the Libyan pilot explained that the aircraft suffered a breakdown, which forced him to make an emergency landing. Adnan Shawashi, CGTN, Tunis.
Here in Kenya, the Finance Minister Henry Rotich and other public officials have denied charges against them linked to corruption. The charges include abuse of office, conspiracy to commit an economic crime, flaunting procurement laws, among others. The officials were charged in court on Tuesday of a multi-billion shilling dam scandal. On Monday, the country's Director of Public Prosecutions ordered the arrest of the Finance Minister, his accounting officer, and 26 other officials. CGTN's Robert Nagila has more.
4 months after he was first questioned by police over corruption allegations, Kenya's Finance Minister Henry Rotich was detained on Monday on orders from the public prosecutor over corruption allegations.
I have today directed the DCI to effect the arrest and immediate arraignment before court of the accused persons named below herein. 1. Henry Kiplagat Rotich, Cabinet Secretary, National Treasury.
The charges against Rotich originate from a police investigation into the misuse of funds in a dam project overseen by Italian construction company CMC di Ravenna. The public prosecutor alleges the two dams were budgeted to cost $446 million, but that figure was inflated by $170 million. However, despite the government releasing $190 million, work has never commenced on the project. The public prosecutor has demanded that Rotich, who will be charged alongside 27 other senior officials, including the accounting officer at the Treasury Department, and Italian national Paolo Pacelli, the director of CMC di Ravenna, step down from his position as cabinet secretary.
They will have to step aside. This is. It's not two ways.
Okay.
These are not governors. They are not, but this is a process that I will write to the head of public service.
Rotich and his co-accused face 8 charges, ranging from conspiracy to defraud and financial misconduct.
Mr. Speaker.
The minister has denied any wrongdoing. Robert Nagila, CGTN, Nairobi, Kenya.
To the Democratic Republic of Congo, where another Ebola center has been burnt down. The treatment center has been serving dozens of patients affected by the virus, and identified assailants attacked and set alight the center on Monday. Such incidents have become common in the region as concern mounts over widespread distrust of health agencies. Health workers say these incidents have significantly hampered the response to the disease, given that the virus is likely to spread further. They're now calling on government and its partners for protection.
As you can see, bandits came to burn the center for sorting Ebola cases. We're getting a lot of sick people. The whole community was coming to get treatment here, 20 to 25 patients a day. Let the government ensure the safety of its health workers. The authority of the state must be restored in this environment that is beyond the control of the government.
14 member countries of the European Union agreed to a new solidarity mechanism proposed by Germany and France to allocate migrants and refugees across the bloc. The announcement came after foreign affairs and interior ministers of the EU gathered in the French capital Paris on Monday to discuss immigration and security issues. Disagreements on how to share out rescuees led the EU to end its Mediterranean Sea patrols earlier this year. Libya has become a major conduit for African migrants and refugees hoping to reach Europe by crossing the Mediterranean Sea. French President Emmanuel Macron called on Libyan authorities Monday to stop holding transiting refugees in detention camps.
Faced with this situation, I draw several conclusions. The first is an explicit demand from France to the Libyan authorities to put an end to the detention and the situation which has developed on the ground with regards to these populations, and to allow, in cooperation with the Office of High Commissioner for Refugees, the International Organization for Migration, and all the other actors, these people who are in transit, who are waiting, to be returned to safety according to the protocols which have already been laid out by the organizations I mentioned.
Of course, we're encouraging Europe, and the Commissioner will play a vital role there to pursue the establishment of this shared solidarity mechanism for people arriving in Europe. It's a mechanism that the IOM and the OHCR have talked about for a long time, and which is being firmed up now, and it is very important.
The Wildebeest Migration is one of the 7 new wonders of the world. Over 2 million animals migrate from the Serengeti National Park in Tanzania to Kenya during July through to October. Well, the huge herds of wildebeest have now made it into the Mara Triangle, and the spectacle of the Great Migration is underway. The vultures have started swarming, and the lions and crocodiles are preparing for the next meal as the herds thunder through the plains in search of fresh green grass.
Good afternoon, good morning, wherever you might be in the world. Welcome to the Mara Triangle in Kenya, where we are in amongst the migration of wildebeest. My name is Steve, joined by Jean-Andre on camera, and how fantastic is this? We've been waiting for hours for it to kick off, and now the dust and the pressure has finally built up to a point where the wildebeest have finally decided it's time to cross. It is the middle of the day and it is hot. We've been watching these wildebeest building on the other side of the bank, and I think soon a couple more of the chutes are going to open as the wildebeest descend from the Mara Conservancy on that side. And there are hundreds of thousands of wildebeest on either side of the banks at the moment. Oh, those guys jumping There's some jumping going on. There's some very inaccessible, oh, look at that. Some very inaccessible places that they choose to go down. And that all is derived from the pressure that comes from behind. You see all those wildebeest coming from the back, horns, bodies, the press. But once it starts, all those that are massing at the back, some of them who've been turning around to head back in the other direction, they all suddenly hear the commotion and they all turn and increase the pressure. Look at that. Much more convenient for them coming down there on the right-hand side. There's a third one to the right of it that they were using the other day. If we get all three of these chutes open, it will be spectacular. It's just been unbelievable how many there are, and still for there to be thousands here at this one point trying to cross again is just remarkable. When one goes, they all go, and they try to make sure they're in the middle, try to make sure it's not them who gets picked out. So often you'll see when they get down to the water's edge that they actually jump, especially if they're in the front. They jump to try and clear whatever crocodile might be waiting right there at the water's edge. And still they mount at the back more and more and more, attracted to the noises, the sounds.
You're watching Africa Live. Coming up in business news, the Kenyan shilling tumbles as finance minister is arraigned in court on corruption charges. And South Africa's banking and asset management group Investec allows staff to dress down and take leave on their terms.
Africa is the nexus of enterprise, and global business will tell you why it matters.
From the mega investment projects to multi-billion-dollar mergers and acquisitions.
Africa today collects, just in terms of revenues from taxes alone, $545 billion a year. If you take 10% of that and you devote it to the energy sector, problem solved.
All this on Global Business, weekdays at this time on CGTN.
There's more to this place than just glorious landscapes. There's more to it than just, say, Table Mountain or glorious, endless salt flats. There's more to it than countries that are home to some of the deepest mines in the world. There is so much more to this place, even if it is home to some of the finest diamonds on the planet. It is the sheer diversity of the people who call Southern Africa home, and the relentless drive to make it a better place that make it so special. And we know that because this too is home. No one knows Southern Africa like we do. CGTN, see the difference.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
The Kenyan shilling hit a 20-month low against the dollar, while the foreign-listed Eurobonds fell. The drop is being attributed to the arrest of the country's finance minister, Henry Rotich, who has been charged for financial misconduct. It also signals investors unease at the vacuum left at the Ministry of Finance. Financial markets, however, are so far resisting the shockwaves associated with the arrest. CGTN's Alexandra Majala has more.
Kenya's Director of Public Prosecutions, Nuruddin Haji, says he has approved economic crimes charges against Treasury Cabinet Secretary Henry Rotich, as well as his Deputy Principal Secretary Kamau Tuge.
This decision has been made professionally, independently, devoid of any external influence, political consideration, or any other extraneous matters. Consequently, I have today directed the DCI to effect the arrest and immediate arraignment before court of the accused persons named below hearing.
The two have appeared before court on Tuesday to face graft charges. Rotich and Tuge are being charged over a $446 million contract awarded to CMC di Ravenna. The Italian company was allegedly paid for the construction of the Kimwara and Aro Dams project in Elgeyo Marakwet County. Both projects haven't been started.
In view of the international nature of these crimes, we realize that we cannot fight corruption on our own, and as a strategy to fighting economic crimes, the Office of the Director of Public Prosecution has prioritized the tracing of proceeds of crime, benefits and instruments of crime, asset confiscation and forfeiture.
Rotich's arrest is an unprecedented detention of a sitting minister for corruption in a country notorious for graft.
It's an important step forward. It could be a defining moment, but I would say that it is still too early to say that this is the moment we've been waiting for. Of course, opening charges against the person who has been in charge of public finance policy in this country is a significant step. But I think more importantly is not to open charges, but to basically ensure we get convictions and also that the assets are recovered.
Both Rotich and CMC deny any wrongdoing. The DPP has asked the minister and other accused officials to resign immediately. The two dams were budgeted to cost $446 million, but Treasury under Rotich borrowed $630 million instead, needlessly rushing up Kenya's ballooning public debt, which stands at around 55% of the GDP. Alexandria Majala for CGTN.
Banking and Asset Management Group Investec has introduced a new leave policy as well as a new dress code for its South African employees. The latest flexible system will enable employees to choose when and how they take leave, ensuring they deliver on key performance indicators. CGTN's Julie Shire has the details.
Financial institutions are known for strict employee guidelines, but global asset manager Investec is changing the norm. It's the first South African company to introduce a flexible leave system.
We don't want to pay people for their time only. We want to pay them for their performance. We want to reward performance, but we want people to use their time to deliver in terms of the absolutely exponential requirements that we have inside the environment. So people can take leave, not to a maximum amount of days, to whatever time they need.
The bank has also implemented a new dress code, which doesn't always require suits or formal wear.
If your day entails a client that requires you to don a suit and tie, that's exactly what you'll be wearing. If your day is in front of regulators and that means a certain dress code, so consider what your day is, act like an adult, think about what that means for you and how you need to be and show up in that way.
Investec prides itself on having a dynamic culture and strong sense of trust with its employees. It's now aligning itself with international workplace trends through a flexible leave policy and more relaxed dress code.
I've seen quite a few employers sort of look at going in that direction because of women and their sort of parental responsibilities, and it was about making sure that they didn't lose women. But it's now gone a lot beyond that, and flexible working is generally applied across the board.
But there are challenges. Job flexibility could mean never logging off, and not everyone may be suited to it.
I have had clients that have rolled this out a few years ago, and some unfortunately did have issues with performance, where people just weren't disciplined enough to put in the hours at home, and they just worked better in a team where there was sort of a team motivating them to work. So it does vary.
Investec is hoping a more flexible work ethic will create a healthy work-life balance for its employees, boost productivity, and further enhance innovation. Julie Shara, CGTN, Johannesburg, South Africa.
Nigeria's central bank is doing everything to get deposit money banks in the country to increase lending to the real sector of the economy, especially SMEs. CGTN's Deji Badmas explains.
Just how do you get a very reluctant and unwilling lender to start lending and get the economy firing again? That's a question the Central Bank of Nigeria has been trying to answer with the raft of measures it's taking lately to compel commercial banks in the country to increase their lending to SMEs. Nigeria's loan-to-deposit ratio is among the lowest on the continent, something the CBN wants to change. Just recently, it ordered banks to give out 60% of their deposits as loans to the real sector. It then followed that up with a directive limiting the size of interest-bearing deposits it would hold for deposit money banks. And now it's going after banks' investments in government debts, telling the banks last week that their bids for treasury bills must be backed by customers' demand.
In effect, what the central bank's primary objective is to push the banks to resume lending or to increase their lending. Whether the lending will really go to the small and medium-scale enterprise that have higher risk, or the banks will lower their interest costs or interest rates in the lending to the blue-chip companies, to the high-net-worth individual and blue-chip companies. The banks will have to make their choices. But head or tail, I want to believe that we're going to see some level of loosening in the bank's credit approval process or risk acceptance criteria.
Nigerian banks are usually reluctant to lend to SMEs because of the risk associated with that sector, which is largely unstructured. Banks had always preferred to invest their funds in high-yielding and risk-free government debts.
The small and medium-scale enterprises are still considered high-risk sectors. And why are they considered high-risk sectors? Because one, their cost of operation is quite expensive when you look at the scale of the operation. Then because they have to provide power, provide security, and what have you. And then there's also the issue of risk sharing. The banks will be asking the central bank or the Ministry of Finance for some level of risk sharing when it lends to the small and medium-scale enterprises.
While the CBN pushes for increased lending, the Apex Bank will have to do something about the high interest rate at which commercial banks lend.
The banks will have to look at their cost of fund. They must cover their cost of fund in determining their lending rates, because the lending rate will be the weighted average cost of fund plus some margin. And that margin will include the risk premium and the profitability margin. So the rate at which the banks borrow from the public in terms of the rate at which they accept deposit will be a major factor in determining whether the banks can bring down their deposit rate, their lending rate.
With the central bank saying it is more than determined to push this new set of policies through, analysts say it's time for deposit money banks in the country to start reviewing their risk acceptance criteria and their target markets with a view to identifying credits that will qualify for lending and the sectors of the economy they are open to lending to. Deji Badmos, CGTN, Lagos, Nigeria.
China and the United Arab Emirates have signed over a dozen cooperation agreements, including ones involving their militaries and the Road and Belt Initiative. The signing took place after President Xi Jinping held talks with the Crown Prince of Abu Dhabi, Sheikh Mohammed bin Zayed of the UAE. CGTN's Wu Guoshu reports from the Great Hall of the People.
A ceremony with 21 gun salutes. Chinese President Xi Jinping welcomed the Crown Prince of Abu Dhabi, Sheikh Mohammed bin Zayed, to Beijing on Monday. China and the UAE are celebrating the 35th anniversary of diplomatic relations this year. Last July, President Xi became the first Chinese president to visit the UAE in 29 years. A comprehensive strategic partnership was announced during that trip. President Xi says since then, bilateral relations have maintained overall high-quality development. And during this meeting, the two sides will release a joint declaration on strengthening that partnership. The Crown Prince is visiting China for the 4th time. He says deepening the comprehensive strategic partnership will be the biggest priority of the UAE's diplomacy, and that no matter what happens in the world, the UAE will be China's best strategic partner. The two sides signed 16 cooperative agreements after their talks. Top on the list was one to boost military cooperation. Others focused on agriculture, the environment, nuclear energy, and artificial intelligence, as well as cooperation under the Belt and Road Initiative. There was also a memorandum of understanding on listing the Chinese language into the UAE's primary school courses. Prior to this visit, ambassadors from both countries say China and the UAE's relationship is the strongest it's ever been. This visit is expected to enhance their political, military, commercial, cultural, people-to-people, and technological cooperation across the board. Also on the Crown Prince's agenda is a joint economic summit Monday afternoon. Wu Guoshu, CGTN, Beijing.
As Great Britain awaits the results of who will be elected the next Prime Minister to lead the process of formally exiting the European Union, it's also laying the foundation for a post-Brexit economy. That includes promoting trade relations with several countries, including Australia, and trying to lure companies with incentives. Greg Navarro explains.
The move to launch a business that compares products for consumers has been a successful one for Finder.com co-founder Fred Shibesta.
You know, from your credit card to your insurance policy, your cell phone plan, you can compare it all there. It's a free service.
The company has grown in Australia and ventured overseas, including into the UK, where Shibesta says he may consider moving his headquarters.
It's a big deal. It's a big deal where your headquarters are, because that's where you're going to pay your corporate taxes.
It's the kind of move the UK is encouraging as it attempts to build a post-Brexit economy. For many tech companies and startups, the range of incentives being offered, including tax breaks, is tough to ignore.
Now, if it's 50% cheaper from one country to the other, that means you can invest more, you can hire more people, and the company can grow faster.
But it's unclear how long those benefits may last.
Short term, yes, you will have that opportunity. See, there's some benefits to go in there. It might be tax incentives, might be things like property incentives, lower rent or whatever might be the case. But we don't know long term. And that won't be resolved till we know exactly what the United Kingdom is going to end up with.
The UK isn't just focused on tech companies and startups. It's also looking to sign free trade agreements with several countries, including Australia, once it formally leaves the EU. The two countries signed an agreement earlier this year to help smooth the transition for exporters, including Australian wine producers. There's a theory that the UK's exit from the European Union offers no great advantage to Australia's economy. In fact, it could become a source of greater competition.
Well, I actually think that Britain being tied to the European Union has been quite good for Australia, because I think that Britain's been so tied up with red tape in Brussels that they haven't been as competitive as they could be in China and in ASEAN and in Japan and Korea. So Australia's been let off the hook.
Shibesta is convinced the decision to branch out into the UK, despite the uncertainty around Brexit.
The UK's got a very well-established economy. They're very good at marketing into Europe.
Was a smart one. Greg Navarro, CGTN, Sydney.
The signing of a power-sharing agreement between Sudan's military rulers and protest leaders is long overdue. It provides a chance to conclude a political crisis that has kept protesters on the streets for months. But according to analysts, the challenge ahead for Sudan is to rebuild its shattered economy. CGTN's Yasser Hakim explains.
The Sudan economy has been suffering the effects of political instability, civil strife, and years of an economic embargo by the US on former President Omar al-Bashir.
The foreign currency revenue has dropped drastically since the secession of South Sudan, as 85% of oil revenue has gone to the south. But the country has never put up a plan to create alternative sources of revenue. The result is that there is no income. While the subsidies on petroleum products are huge, this led to fast-growing debt and inflation, which has reached 70%. There is not enough foreign currency in the market, not enough to even support import of paper to print the local currency. Obviously, poverty has struck the population at high levels.
The peace deal signed by the political forces entails establishing a new government. Experts say this government should focus on rebuilding the economy.
It is one of the most important economies in Africa, but it is also one of the poorest 20 nations worldwide. There's so much wealth in natural resources, in fuel, in rich agricultural land, in animal stock. There's an abundance of reserves in minerals, iron, copper and gold. There's a lot to build on.
There is huge potential in Sudan if well managed. But Sudan cannot depend on itself for economic recovery. It needs the support of the international community. And the first to offer this support were Gulf Arab nations, Saudi Arabia and the United Emirates, in addition to Egypt. The United Arab Emirates and Saudi Arabia have already pledged $3 billion in soft loans to support the state budget. They've also delivered over 600,000 tons of wheat, in addition to shipments of fuel, medicine and food. A host of investment opportunities are also expected from several countries, including China, to revitalize the economy.
Investments should be in agriculture, which already constitutes 2/3 of the GDP. There are 200 million hectares of arable land. Sudan can be self-sufficient and even feed Africa if cultivated. There must be investments in industries and mining to create jobs, as unemployment reached 40% now. Then there's livestock with 120 million cattle in Sudan, enough to cover the needs of the whole continent.
Some experts believe Sudan should learn from Egypt's aggressive economic reforms that were undergone after the 2013 uprising. Yes, Hakim for CGTN, Cairo.
You're watching Africa Live. Still ahead, how South African teens are fighting gun crime with radio broadcast.
Join us in Global Business and see Africa through our eyes.
The greatest journeys, the greatest sights, the greatest adventures.
Here in Qanater, this weir allows the locals to walk on water.
We're far more than just TV news. We're your passport to the wonders of Africa.
To bring you stories of struggle, survival and hope.
So let's explore. CGTN. See the difference.
In South Africa, a township community radio station established in 1994 hosts a weekly show on the burden of neighborhood gun crime. The broadcast is held by local teenagers, some of whom have been victims of gang violence in Johannesburg. CGTN's Brian Toussaint has this report.
The topic of the day is the role of policy and how you can influence gun.
Teenagers who host Alex FM's weekly bigger-than-life radio show are determined to help stem violence in the crime-ridden Johannesburg township of Alexandra.
We're still talking about the role of policy and how you can influence gun laws in South Africa.
Every Saturday morning, the crew discusses gun laws with the station's 150,000 listeners.
Gun violence, it's something that people in Alexandra have tend to normalize, which is not a good thing. So us talking about gun violence actually helps make people realize and makes them gain conscious that it's not okay for someone to be killed with a gun.
The area of Alexandra has been nicknamed Gomorrah after the sinful biblical city. Flooded with bare brick houses and corrugated iron steel shacks, lack of running water and electricity are all too familiar to local residents.
Alexandra has a history of violence. And it's, some people call Alexandra Gomorrah, and that's not something one can be proud of.
Alexandra is poverty-stricken with about 300,000 people facing dire challenges. Some of these include gang violence, joblessness, and a lack of basic health and education services. Open sewers and waste dumps also defile its streets.
We're only killing our society by keeping quiet about certain issues, and us talking about them, we're influencing other young people that your voice matters. I hate saying this, we're speaking for the voiceless. They're not voiceless, they just need a platform, and that's what we're doing. We're giving them a platform in order to voice their issues. Members of the public include South Africa.
About a third of those who face violence in the township are killed by guns, according to Gun Free South Africa. In a 2017 survey, South Africa counts at least 2 million illegal firearms and an estimated 3 million legally registered firearms. The youth radio volunteers tell of a culture of fear that silences residents, fueling the insecurity as victims are reluctant to go to the police. Brian Toussaint, CGTN.
Still in South Africa, the Potjiekos is a kind of stew cooked in a cast iron pot on an open fire. Johannesburg hosts a competition where teams compete for the best Potjiekos title. Professionals and amateurs alike are found at the yearly event. The proceeds go to charity. CGTN's Oly Ilunga has more.
It's about who makes the best sizzling pot of Potjiekos. There's over 35 different pots of Potjiekos here to compete. Comparatively, most Potjiekos recipes usually take long to cook, but the end result is remarkable. The dish consists of a variety of ingredients, typically meat and vegetables, layered in a round cast iron pot and placed on open coals.
This style of cooking dates back to the 1500s, and it epitomizes South Africa's cuisine.
And it is loved across cultures.
So Potjiekos has a very good traditional ring in our country. Most people that have had a potjie at some point in time have spent a lot of time around a fire with people that mean a lot to them. This is not something that you can fast track.
The event is geared more towards charity, though, than hardcore competition.
Hi, this is a neighborhood event here. It's predominantly a charity function. A lot of the judges here are from restaurants that are supported very well by these local communities. And as judges, we've got an opportunity to interface with our communities that are here. We're very impressed with the effort that's been put in so far by all the participants. And it's really an opportunity for us to put back to the community that serve us so well on a regular basis. So give up our Sundays. Normally we would be in the restaurant now anyway. So it's a privilege for us to be part of the community that supports us so well on a daily basis.
The beneficiaries would be the local schools in the Parkview area, because the Parkview community is so important to us. So we give back to the community. We also make sure that we maintain the park in which we have the Potjiekos. So we keep the park maintained. And then there are a host of other beneficiaries.
And the best potjie first prize goes to the Hungry Pigs.
Here in South Africa, Potjiekos is rivaled only by another firm South African favorite, the braai, which is grilled meat over open fire. Oly Ilunga for CGTN in Johannesburg, South Africa.
Let's revisit our story on the UK leadership. Boris Johnson is expected to be announced as Tory leader. That event should be taking place at the QE2 Centre in London. Let's cross over now live to London. Richard Investec joins us from there. So Richard, we were expecting that announcement some moments ago. It hasn't happened. What's causing the delay?
Oh, well, you know, news never cares when it happens. I'm afraid these political events are always riven with delays. Last minute details on whether Boris Johnson or Jeremy Hunt will speak when the result is made known. They haven't actually arrived at the place. Perhaps they won't arrive at all. But we are now down to the last few minutes and fully expect the former Foreign Secretary Boris Johnson to be declared the leader of Britain's ruling Conservative Party, and as a consequence of that, the Prime Minister designate. Will it be a smooth ride from here on in? Well, there are those suggesting it will get very difficult indeed for Boris, the man known throughout the land here simply by his given name, Boris. He will be inheriting a divided country, split pretty much down the middle on whether we should have Brexit at all, whether there should be another referendum, a divided parliament, and the tensions inside his Conservative Party were laid bare just in the last couple of minutes when Anne Milton, an education minister, resigned because she couldn't bring herself to serve in a Johnson government. She follows Alan Duncan, obviously, and there are others waiting in the line, like the current, but probably outgoing, Chancellor of the Exchequer, Philip Hammond, who will be leaving when it is declared that Boris Johnson is going to be Britain's next Prime Minister. He will become the third Prime Minister in Britain in the 3 years since the Brexit referendum in 2016. It's a measure, isn't it, of the damage that's been done to the British political structures, that 2 prime ministers have already fallen victim to Brexit, and there are big questions about whether Boris Johnson can actually bring off the claims that he's made. These claims that he will be out of the European Union with Britain by October the 31st, that he's prepared to renegotiate, but he's prepared to walk away from the table and go for a hard, no-deal Brexit, something the Chancellor of the Exchequer, Philip Hammond, says would push the British economy over a cliff. So it's going to be a rough ride. The first 100 days of Boris Johnson's premiership could be a telling event, and everyone in that building behind me, the British Parliament, is anticipating there will be an early election as Boris Johnson tries to build up a majority and get something on Brexit through Parliament.
All right, Richard Bestick there live in London. Thank you for that. So the 3rd Prime Minister in 3 years, that's how tough that Brexit issue has become. We're of course keeping a keen eye on that. That announcement should be happening anytime now, and it will be taking place at the QE2 Centre in London. We'll be giving you the details as and when we get them in our subsequent bulletins here on CGTN. And with that, we call it a day on Africa Live for now. We welcome your feedback. Send it to the contacts on the screen and follow us on our digital media platform. I'm Peninah Karibe. Thank you for watching.